Em seguida, nós teremos a palestra com o tema Galvanization in the European Union, com o palestrante Murray Cook, Director of EGGA, European General Galvanizers Association. Please, Mr. Cook, I would like to invite you to the stage. Mr. Cook has been director of the European General Galvanizers Association, EGGA, since 2006. EGGA is the European Federation of General Galvanizing Industry in Europe. He began his career as a process engineer in the semiconductor industry before joining the Zinc Development Association, London, as marketing executive and later heading of UK Galvanizers Association. Mr. Cook graduated from the University of Wales, College of Cardiff with BSc, honors in materials science and metallurgical engineering. He also holds a Chartered Institute of Marketing diploma in marketing.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me again to speak at Galva Brazil. It was an honor to speak at the first Galva Brazil. It's a surprise to be invited back, an even bigger honor to come twice. I have been invited to speak about what is happening with the galvanizing industry in Europe. I will speak first about what is happening in the industry. Then ICZ asked me to speak not just about the present, but also about the past, how the market has evolved in Europe, perhaps starting around the 1970s, and how the products have changed that we are galvanizing, and to see whether there are some lessons and some interesting things that can be learnt from that. I will then speak about the marketing, which is done in Europe, in the construction area, and then give some examples of how galvanizing is used in Europe, especially in architecture and in construction. First, to explain EGGA, some of you know us quite well, attending our Intergalva conference, but EGGA is the European Association for the Industry, but we don't have companies as members. Our members are the national associations for the industry that you see here. So we have now 13 associations, which covers 20 European countries. And I'm pleased, I learned just this week that Turkey will also join EGGA for 2014. We also have the support of 9 of the major suppliers of equipment and services to the industry. This is our story so far. There are not too many surprises on this chart. You will see that our industry grew steadily from 1996 until 2008, and of course the economic crisis had its impact on us. You'll see that actually it was not after this smaller, this downturn here, we had a period of growth, but this was completely driven by Germany, and I will explain the importance of Germany in our industry in a moment. So what's happened now in 2012 is that German industrial production and construction output has also now followed the same path as the rest of Europe, so we have overall a downturn. So in 2012, we galvanized around 6 million tons of steel in Europe, but that covers just the countries which are members of EGGA. So if you take total Europe and you add Poland, Turkey, some other important countries, our market is around 7.5 million tons. And when we speak about intensity of use, you can certainly say that probably the normal level for Europe is around 16 kilograms per inhabitant, but of course we are now down to 14. Germany comprises around 1/3 of the European galvanizing industry, has over 160 galvanizing plants, and those five countries is responsible for around 80% of general galvanizing in Europe. So those, the other industry in the other countries are important, but small compared to those five countries. You remember from the earlier chart that we lost around 1 million tons of production between 2008 and 2012, but you'll see here that kettle capacity continued to rise. We are not such a clever industry. We continued to build kettles even when the economic crisis started to bite, everybody feeling that somebody else would close. And today we have a peak of kettle capacity in Europe. So we have a significant overcapacity. And in many countries, in particular in southern Europe, most of the plants would be operating today on single shifts and at perhaps 40% of their rated capacity. Before I speak about how the market has evolved in terms of applications, again, this is no surprise. 45% of our uses are in construction and building, a further 15% in street furniture. So those two segments dominate the use and application. But where did we start? As you know, and as you would expect, in the 1970s, we were typically galvanizing small hardware buckets. We had small plants, and this would be rather typical of the industry at that time. By the beginning of the late 1970s, beginning of the early 1980s, products such as transmission towers, which were manufactured in Europe, certainly in the UK, in Germany, and then exported all around the world, dominated big parts of the industry. Looking back at our statistics, countries where we have good statistics, in Spain, transmission towers in 1979 were 1/3 of the output of galvanizing plants in Spain. In 1979, it was 15% of UK output from galvanizing plants. Today, in Europe, this is probably less than 1% of our business. So the structure of our markets has changed. By the early 1990s, these were the products that you would have seen in galvanizing plants in Europe, chemical process plants, the beginnings of the civil engineering applications for batch galvanizing. Therefore, we, of course, went to larger plants, larger kettles, driven by this type of business. Another important factor of growth in Europe was street furniture. This occurred at different times in different countries in Europe, but I think you would say between middle of the 1980s and the turn of the millennium, the rapid growth in street furniture was the major driver of the size of the industry we have in Europe today. In the UK, for example, it was the requirement, a government requirement, that this type of security fencing should surround all of the railway lines that ran through not only urban areas but also rural areas. So this suddenly became one of the most significant products galvanized in the UK industry in the late 1990s. So everything that required some security had this type of fencing surrounding it. And of course, we had guardrails around roads, but then we had guardrails around every road, around every bridge, around every incline in the road. And the final phase of development, which I think happened probably more around 1995 onwards, was that it became very typical that every product in our cities and around our streets was a galvanized product. So then came the bicycle shelters, the bollards, and particularly in countries like Germany, you would find every piece of steel that was in the street would be galvanized. So if I just take countries, a country like the UK, which is one that I know best, and one where we have good comparable statistics. You can see here exactly what has happened. The market from in the 20 years around 1980 to 2000 doubled, but all of that growth was driven by construction, but also by street furniture. So you can see the growth in this street furniture here. And that has been maintained in the 8 or 10 years since. An interesting characteristic in the UK market actually was the growth in agriculture. And this was mainly driven by the restructuring of our farming industry into more cooperatives, larger farms with more capability of investment. We saw a lot of new buildings, farm buildings, and farm equipment. And that has and continues to be an important market in the UK that perhaps you don't see in some other European countries. So one thing that I think is important is that when we look back, the marketing and promotion, because it was around this time in the 1980s that the industry started to invest properly in marketing in construction and marketing to architects. And the effect of that, I think, is very clear here, whereas the growth in street furniture was largely driven by new products which came to the market, not necessarily by the marketing done by the industry. So, yeah, and as I said, I think you can ignore this effect of the economic crisis, which again is a factor outside our control. So what were the lessons of the past that are perhaps important for today? And I would do this. I would separate these markets, power, utilities, industrial equipment, from the infrastructure and the construction markets and the architectural market. In this market, our experience is that the evolution of those markets is normally driven by things outside our control. We can intervene. These markets require technical support from our industry. We can reinforce the position of galvanizing through standardization by ensuring that the standards for those products require galvanizing. And we need to be very aware of competitors, other products, other technical solutions for those products. Our experience is that some of these markets come, but they also go sometimes as quickly as they arrive. Technological changes in new products and new solutions, movements away from steel, saturation of markets, imports of products, means that these types of markets can change rather quickly. Maybe in a 4 or 5 year period, they can disappear. That is different from our construction and architecture markets, which we have shown will respond to the investment we make in promotion. So the market penetration responds directly to our promotional efforts. We need the awareness and approval of hot dip galvanizing by architects and engineers. If an architect becomes comfortable with using galvanized steel for one project, the project may change, the structure may change, the use may change, but the specification will remain the same. So it is perhaps a more sustainable and a more solid way to grow the market. And a term which I have used a lot, and I took this from an architect which advised us in the UK on our promotion, it was to develop this imaginative enthusiasm with the architect. These are not technical messages. This is about making what are largely artistic people enthusiastic about using our material, which is galvanized steel. And you'll see some examples of that later. But creating that imaginative enthusiasm and supporting those markets requires a commitment from the industry. And this has been a feature of the European industry, has been, I think, more than any other industry in the galvanizing world, is the commitment that we make and the investment that the companies make through associations to the marketing. So you see here, although Germany, of course, is a very large market, it's nearly 2 million tons, they have 9 full-time staff in their association. I just took the examples of some I know very well, Germany, UK, Belgium and the Netherlands, and Spain. You see that between these 4 associations, there are 7, 15, so 24 full-time staff. The difference also between Germany and the UK and perhaps the others is that when you have significant staff, you have the opportunity to be on the street. You can be out visiting architects, and in the case of both Germany and the UK, they would have 3 or 4 people that are permanently outside the office visiting architects and persuading them to use galvanized steel. Turning again to our experience, we make a lot of mistakes, of course, but we can also say what has been important for success. I would identify these 4 points. First, we need to communicate examples of use, and not examples from the past, examples from the present. Case histories are very interesting to engineers, but they're not interesting to architects. Architects want to see, has another architect used galvanized steel for a similar structure? Second, in Europe, sustainable construction and green building are very hot topics in the construction industry. And we have worked very hard to exploit the concept of sustainable construction because we feel it fits very well with our product. Although these are important, architects are also practical people, and they must have some contractual benefit from using galvanized steel. And identifying what those simple benefits to them are, rather than necessarily the technical advantages of galvanizing, it's the contractual benefits. I'll explain some of that in a moment. And finally, we need strong associations, as I mentioned previously. So looking at those examples of use, I think you're familiar with a lot of this. First, we have to find those examples, and the best way to do that, and I know you have done this already very well here in Brazil through ICZ, is to have awards. And awards are important not just for publicity, but they are important to build your database, to bring forward the examples of use that you can then use in other communications. And we have now, as you know, our International Galvanizing Awards to help that process. But those things go through our national associations now into web-based databases of use where architects can look and find examples similar to their own examples. And through things like this Hot Dip Galvanizing magazine, which is published now in English, in Spanish and in German, and distributed all around the world actually, not just in Europe, we can communicate those examples in a format that's interesting for architects, usually not with a lot of technical details. For sustainable construction, first, identifying the key messages. Recyclability, durability, and the healthy image of zinc are the main 3 points. But there is a last one, which is actually quite simple. It is simplicity. Our process is a simple process. It's not complicated. And I think there is certainly a perception in the architectural world that things which are complicated usually are not so sustainable, and simple things are more sustainable. We need, of course, to provide data for that, and we spent a lot of time in Europe collecting environmental information on the product, not just carbon footprinting, but information on emissions, global warming potential, acidification potential, and all of this into these so-called environmental product declarations, which in Europe now, for public construction, it is almost a mandatory requirement to have environmental data on your product before you can be specified or used. And that is now spreading into private construction also. Another is involving the industry. It's making our industry confident enough to speak about galvanizing and the modern galvanizing industry as a green product. And I think that's something which I feel we have succeeded. We branded this even, the European Initiative for Galvanizing in Sustainable Construction, and that message was as important for our own galvanizers as it was for the customers. I mentioned earlier the contract benefits. Some of these things you will know very well, but they're important to communicate to architects, and in our experience, once they experience these benefits, it then leads them to use galvanizing again. And they are not difficult things. First, it's very simple to specify. To specify paint is much more difficult than to specify galvanizing. It's one standard and a very simple specification. There are some practical benefits. The speed of construction, the flexibility of construction is an important feature of steel construction, but galvanizing assists that. Off-site fabrication, prefabrication are all important trends in steel construction where galvanizing can reinforce that and make that work better. Of course, avoiding site damage, avoiding contractual disputes which often occur with painted structures is another advantage of galvanizing. And again, once people experience this, they tend to stay with us. And finally, and I underlined this because it's become more and more important in Europe, painting has become more expensive generally. It will in the future become more standardized and it will be more difficult to paint cheaply. In the past, we have focused very much on life cycle costing, showing the complicated benefits of the long-term financial advantages of using galvanized steel. More and more in Europe, we find, especially for industrial buildings, that we are competitive on a first cost basis. So if you compare perhaps our slightly lower galvanizing prices than maybe you have outside Europe, but you compare our galvanizing prices with a real cost of painting on first cost basis, we are very close together. And this is an important message that is not always obvious from all our marketing brochures which speak often about life cycle costing. And finally, the associations. I think, again, you will know this very well from your experience with ICZ. I think you're building this already. Associations have to give confidence to customers. They have to provide authoritative advice, a reassurance. They are responsible for the technical support and the education of our customers. In Europe, and I think this is also the case here in Brazil, they also provide a very important link with the steel construction industry. And I emphasize the steel construction industry, not necessarily the steel production industry. The steel production industry, increasingly, for us in Europe, is a competitor as much as it is a partner with continuously coated steels. But the steel construction and fabrication industry are a very important partner. And in Europe, I think we have, in some countries, turned the corner from being, let's say, often a little confrontational with our customer associations and having them see that we can help them promote steel, and galvanizing and steel can be promoted together. So when we talk about associations, something that's very important for us, you'll hear actually from Javier Zabadell from our TEG later this afternoon. You saw our structure. We don't have companies as members. We have a strong network of associations, and that's because in Europe, of course, Europe is a big combination of cultures, it's a combination of languages, and it's also a combination of construction practices, different construction practices, and different construction cultures. So you will see, simply by looking at the websites of our major associations, that the emphasis and the focus that they take is very much targeted on their customers, on their industry, in their country. The other important thing, and you'll see here just our Benelux Association's website focusing on uses and applications of galvanizing. An important development in Europe, I'd say in the last 10 years, is that the galvanizing companies themselves have also become better marketers. They have realized that you cannot leave marketing only to associations and that companies are responsible for taking orders and satisfying customers. Our associations and the companies work together in marketing. And it's just, again, if you look just quickly at some of the websites of these companies, you will find that examples of application, messages on sustainable construction, messages for architects and customers, you will always find now on these websites. If you went to the brochures of the galvanizing companies 10 years ago, you would have found diagrams of design for galvanizing, information about anti-spatter compounds for welding, practical information. But now you see more the messages about what the products can do for the customers, for the architects and the final customers. So what have been the results of all of that in Europe? And I'll now go through some of the examples of of application. Some of these, I think some of you will have seen before during our Intergalva conference. One of the things which we're pleased has become a new innovation with architecture in Europe is the use of galvanizing for facades. This is the AE Hall. It's an extension to the Stockholm International Fair, constructed in 2010. And you find in this structure over 1,500 of these perforated steel panels. The architect wanted to give a basket weave type appearance. You don't see it so clearly here. But Sweden is a country which is very focused on sustainable construction and green building. And this building has become a very good example of an architect that has chosen to use galvanized steel in a very visible way, but also because he believed that the simplicity and the sustainability of that choice improve the stature of the project. Secondly, another joint winner of our International Galvanizing Awards in 2012, the Porta del Parco in Napoli, in Italy, produced by the architect Silvia Daschia, who is in fact based in France. It's another high-profile building. It's a centre for a conference centre, and also for there's a swimming pool connected to this structure also. I think a very good example again of sustainable construction. This was one of the requirements for this public expenditure on construction, was that it should be a sustainable building. So galvanizing was chosen for that reason. But you'll also see that this was a use of galvanized steel which is largely internal. So it was a real commitment to using galvanized steel, because actually the technical reasons for using galvanized steel were not so obvious. The steel is actually clad and mainly internal. This is another typical example now in Europe where galvanized steel is used in the regeneration and extension of existing buildings. This is a film and theatre school in Brussels, in Belgium. It's a good example of this use of galvanized steel, not only externally, but of course in the internal fabric of the structure. The galvanized steel, batch galvanizing, is also used in the ceilings and in the internal fabric of the building. So it's become fashionable to extend the use of galvanized steel both internally as well as externally. One of my favourite examples is this rest area. This was this is a national park in the Czech Republic where there was a requirement to have an area for walkers and tourists to have a rest during their walk. And one of the small architects in the Czech Republic designed this so-called room in a landscape. Again, these are only small uses of galvanized steel, but they inspire, they're very visible, and they inspire perhaps larger projects later. But you'll see it's a very practical use of galvanized steel. Another building extension is this Marcel Sembat School in France. Again, the architect here, Archi5, is one of the largest architectural practices in France. So it was very important for us in France that they chose to use galvanized steel for the structure of the extension of the building. It has a vegetated roof, so it's quite a large structure because it's taking quite a bit of weight. But again, the galvanized steel extends internally. The extension is for teaching car mechanics, auto mechanics. I mentioned earlier the increased use of galvanized steel for facades, for external facades. This is a structure which covers one of the oldest archaeological sites related to iron and steel production. It's the oldest manufacturing site for pig iron in the Ruhr region of Germany, and they covered the site using this galvanized structure. And you can imagine here that there's a huge amount of attention to the detail of the specification of the steel to ensure that we have the appropriate appearance. We had, probably starting about 10 years ago, a large number of these architectural sculptures produce around the UK and now also around Netherlands. This is the Crouching Man, which is located at Lelystad on the edge of a dike, the west of the Netherlands. The architect Anthony Gormley, I think, has produced about 20 of these structures around Europe now. Again, these are not necessarily significant in terms of tonnages of steel galvanized, but they're very visible uses of galvanized steel, which inspire architects for larger structures. A project from Spain, another visitor centre, but located in a very remote location where maintenance would be especially problematic. This project uses galvanized steel in the structure and the walkways, staircases in this remote location. And finally, one which is always popular, a use of galvanized steel, again internally, again in a structure where avoiding maintenance is very important. The Rossilli Whisky Distillery, it's the first new whisky distillery to be built in Scotland for about 30 years. And again, it's an industrial building, but it's one where galvanized steel has been used to make an architectural impact, a visual impact, as well as using the technological benefits of durability and avoiding maintenance. Something that at the end I should emphasize, I think this is certainly in order to maintain our market and to maintain the strength of our market whilst other more traditional products may be on a decline. We are now brought more and more into high-value products, smaller products. And this is an example which I found just this year. These are some of the most expensive items of fashionable outdoor furniture you can buy. Just this designer bench here sells for around 1,500 euros. So these are expensive items. So you can imagine this manufacturer in Belgium works very closely with two galvanizing plants, but I'm sure you can imagine the galvanizers here, the attention to detail that's required to achieve this type of surface finish and also to satisfy a production requirement that is usually extremely demanding. And this, I think, is a real feature of our market in Europe now. So, let me summarize. Yes, we speak about Europe being a high-intensity industry, a high-intensity area for batch galvanizing. And yes, we have around 14 to 16 kilograms of galvanizing output per inhabitant. But we also have underneath that, please don't forget, quite a big range. Countries like Austria, which have a high intensity of steel manufacturing, would have an output of around 27 kilos per person, whereas countries like Bulgaria have a use of around 3 kilograms per inhabitant. And if you took something like the UK, which is an island where we don't have so much import and export of galvanized surfaces, we are around 10 kilograms per person, which is probably a more realistic average for a typical European country. Our products and markets have changed significantly over the past 30 or 40 years. I've shown you that, but we expect them again to change in the future. And good statistics and good information so that you can measure the effect of your marketing and to understand how the markets are changing is very important. And I would encourage you as much as possible to start collecting information about the use of galvanized steel in Brazil so that you can make the same analyses in the future. And what we have shown in Europe, and I'm not sure that you need this now because you have other markets which are growing naturally, but I'm sure you will need this in the future, it's that in the construction segments you get back what you put in, and marketing activity, both by the companies and by the associations, does bring results. So, thank you very much. I leave you just with a little reminder, those of you who attend our Intergalva conferences, that the dates for our next Intergalva, 7th to 12th June 2015, will come around very quickly. It's in Liverpool in the UK. Thank you. Okay. That's kind. You wrote the questions in English, so. Right. Okay. You want me to answer these now? Yeah. Okay. So, Mr. Schultz from Petrobras asks, what's the difference or the benefit of using galvanized steel, considering Germany uses much more than the other countries in Europe? Is there any conscious development? Okay. So I guess, where is Mr. Schultz? Okay. I guess your question is, why is Germany so large? And why Germany?
So much steel galvanized among the other countries in Europe.
Yeah, okay. Germany, there are a number of reasons to that, and maybe not all of them we understand, because Germany, of course, has also a strong concrete culture. So maybe you would not necessarily expect Germany to be so strong. And when you look in Germany, what you see is that the market in Germany is, to a large extent, driven by manufactured products. There's still a large engineering, manufacturing industry in Germany, which is dominated by galvanized steel products. To some extent, that has moved into Eastern Europe, but Germany has still remained quite strong. Perhaps the use of galvanized steel in architecture in Germany is not that much higher than in Belgium, in France, and in the UK. But it is largely the industrial engineering products, which have declined in other parts of Europe, are still very strong in Germany. They have markets that we don't have in other parts of Europe. For example, you have companies like Schmitz Cargo Bull, which is a major manufacturer of trucks, the large trucks on the roads. The chassis of these trucks in Germany are galvanized. They work very closely with one or two galvanizers to galvanize these chassis. That's not a market that we manage to turn in the rest of Europe, where mostly those truck chassis are painted. So it's more that type of product than architecture. Yeah. Okay. Stelling from Bonan. Aha. Hello, Stelling. In Europe, there is no new galvanizing plant built, so the main cause is economic crisis, or is there a possibility that prices are too high and we get imports from China? Okay. Firstly, you're right, we don't build new galvanizing plants in Europe so much now. Probably, as you saw, that's a good thing. We have plenty of capacity, so you may see some renovations, but not big new plants, except maybe in Eastern Europe. The reason we have a downturn at the moment is definitely because of the economic crisis. And we will see, I'm sure, when construction activity comes back, our market will grow again. And an example of that is, I didn't talk in detail about individual countries, but the UK, for example, grew by about 1 to 2% galvanizing industry in the UK in 2012, whilst other countries like Germany went down by 5 or 6%. So within Europe, we have different trends, and we already see that in the countries where the macroeconomic situation is improving, where we have different economic cycles, the galvanizing industry follows back into growth. So I think there is some room for optimism there. But yeah, please don't sell any more galvanizing kettles in Western Europe, yeah, for the moment. Louisa Abdallah from Votarantim. Where is Louisa? Okay, hi. I said the industry is operating approximately 40% of its capacity. Has the market diminished this much? Did one specific application stop being galvanized, and are we suffering competition from other materials other than galvanized steel? Okay, lots of questions. Let's do that. I said we're operating around 40% of capacity. Perhaps that's a little bit of an overestimation. Maybe it's 50%. Typically, our statistics tell us on theoretical capacity, even when things are good, we're probably running at about 65% of capacity. The market in some countries has diminished significantly, but let's say we've gone from 65% capacity, utilization to 40% in some countries. But it is reality. I mean, Javier will speak about Spain later. Countries like Spain and Italy have been really devastated in our industry by the economic situation in Europe. So the market in Italy has lost around 1 million tons in itself, well, 750,000 tons in 2 years. The business in Spain at a certain point was down by 40 to 50% year on year. So we have seen in some European countries, especially in Southern Europe, very significant declines. And that is largely related to government spending on infrastructure and private investment in construction. So it's not one specific application, it is general construction activity, economic activity, and infrastructure spending. Do we suffer competition from materials other than galvanized steel? Yes, all the time. The most obvious one is paint, and all of our work normally is competing with paint. But more recently, as I mentioned, we have new competition from new continuously coated steels, very aggressive marketing from companies like ArcelorMittal, from their Magnalis product, and we have to react to that. We can't complain about it, but we see now more competition coming from continuously coated steels into very important markets for us, like guardrails, cable trays, and similar products. Very quickly, Ichiro from Sansu. Ichiro? Hi, hello there. Is there any reason why the amount of galvanized steel in Germany corresponds with more than the UK? So it's, I guess, a similar question to the earlier one, yeah? It's historical. Maybe one thing I didn't mention, many years ago, Germany became a very standardized country. It still is. And they were very fortunate in Germany that for many products, it was written in the standards for those products that batch galvanizing should be used. And one of the problems we have in Europe now is that those standards are changing. More and more European standards are what we call performance focused. So in the past, where a standard for a guardrail would say you have to use batch galvanized steel to EN ISO 1461, the standard now says you should use a material that will be durable for 30 years. It's not permitted now in European standards to say you should use this material or that material. It should be related to the performance of the overall product, and this is a new challenge for us. Okay, am I on time? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook.